Should I say, relatively speaking, because I'm about to speak relatively, in a general area in which we last parted, right next to the Hopalong Cassidy Ranch. And plus, I would like to extend and even narrow, such as pinpoint bombing, the meaning of the word art. First off, the world of acts is the world of causes. All else is art. All else is art, interpretations, and explanations of acts. Now, this is a reshuffling, a rescoring, a repainting of the same kind of general areas that we have mentioned using the descriptions in the past as acts and facts, the primary and secondary world, and the two domains of all of these being very closely related, almost to the point of an incestuous relationship, which I do not want to get into. There are certain laws in Nebraska, and I'm afraid these tapes might get out there. But there is, between all of the primary and secondary, also into the area of explanations and then whatever causes might be. In that sense, art is everything that would be left over from whatever causes could be, let's just pretend for a second, could be identified. It would be the world of acts would be causes. Relatively speaking, you always know that so that you don't feel like you're on a seesaw, and plus, when you're just tuning in, so that you don't think, well, wait a minute, now I understand it. If you understand something from a polarized description, you might as well stay on the chicken farm. You don't understand that? Don't ever put all of your, no, don't count your eggs, don't count your chickens, and don't put your ducks, all. To believe that you suddenly understand that, wait a minute, now that I see everything's divided up into causes, as you call it, and explanations, now I understand it. Boy, if you do, you wasted your time, because it can't be understood from that. You can only use that as the cross sites. You can only use that to learn how on your own to both extend and narrow the scope of some investigation, eschewing any possibility that a period might slip up upon you while you're not looking, and actually make your investigation come to a conclusive end in such a way that you go, now I understand. Because, see, then you have sat there in the bomb bay area, opened it up, dropped the little booger, and suddenly, as you were feeling confident, you happened to look up there in the plane right above you, and what did you see? I know this stretches your credulity, but some of you are in good shape. You look up and you think, my God, a bomb is falling inside this plane. So do not confuse any of this. All right. The world of acts, relatively speaking, to get you going, would be the world of causes, vis-a-vis talking about the world in which man can exist of acts, and the world of facts, and the world in which he might look at things as being a basis of explanations, which are normally taken as causes, and, with just a bit of a stretch, that there could be at least, a world beyond explanations wherein there were actually causes, not the causes that you accept, the explanation you accept the causes. So on that basis, the world of acts would be the world of causes, and everything else, no matter what it was, anything left would be, in a sense, art. It would be explanations. It would be interpretations. It would be comments on acts. That's it. If you can take it that far, thus you could also say that all science, I told you we're going to change, we're going to run through a kind of extreme pasta grinder, the name of art, because this would include all science, hard and the soft social ones. It would include architecture, literature, painting, music, sheetrocking. It would all, well, decent sheetrocking. I know I'm going to regret saying this. You know, such as done by a sober drywall. I knew I was going. Never mind. It would all be art. Do you understand? Because it is all the basis of explanations. And once you understand that, do note that then, with this kind of refreshed, kind of a readjustment, kind of new intelligence, once you understand that, you could never, as we mentioned in a slightly different way, but to expand and to narrow the bombing range tonight, you could never again in any way feel hostile. You could not feel cynical. You could not feel sarcastic. You could not feel smug. You could not feel sincere, insincere, superior in any way to someone else's art. That is, to their ideas, to their explanations, all the way from science, which is art, unless it's an act, and it's not, as I will try to get you to see shortly. That all forms of anything that humans do that would not fall into the category of being an act, which requires no human participation, then it is art. It is an explanation. It is a comment. It is a reflection. It is a human comment upon the silent act. Albeit long forgotten. Because people even believe that they criticize other critics. Why go into that? We've got two people's car already stuck in the mud out here. It would be someone who understands that. To wrap it up, I think we already had a Kyroot a few nights ago that goes like this. Then perhaps now you see it in a different light. Is that explanations are not intended to actually explain anything. Their very existence, in fact, is evidence that things cannot ordinarily be explained. I know that may sound like some kind of verbal, perhaps even clumsy legerdemain that you saw the ace of prepositions up my sleeve. But it's not. The mere fact, and you can almost get a glimpse of this even while sitting somewhere near the city, that explanations are not intended to explain everything, and their mere existence is evidence that things cannot be ordinarily explained. Now, I know it sounds silly, but consider to make it sound sillier. If that were not true, there wouldn't be explanations. Okay, everybody go. I'll do it again. I'll try to push it all together faster. Explanations are not intended. Now remember, I'm putting out from a subversive. It does not belie the use. It does not point out some error. It does not say that men are dumb. Explanations are just as valid and as important as motor oil, as Freon, as pencils and erasers, and just fill it all in. Just as important. But explanations are not intended actually to explain things. That is, on the basis of the cause. That is, if it, well, now I see and everyone's satisfied. That's not true. And I know your brain says, well, that can't be. It's not true, and the mere fact that we have explanations is a form of evidence that explanations are not intended to explain anything, because it is further, I keep saying evidence so that I don't say proof, and some people go, oh, wait a minute. I'll go ahead and say it. Wait a minute. All right. It is evidence. It is evidence, their mere existence, that explanations are not intended to explain anything because explanations are beyond their poor little control. They are admitting that things cannot ordinarily be explained, or else there wouldn't be explanations. Because if things could be explained, there would not be explanations, would there? That was the full extent of this whole smorgasbord, at least this end of the table. Verbally, I know it's all hocus pocus and oxymoronical, but some of us don't mind. Some of us are proud to be not an Okie from Muskogee, but dumb as a good beast of burden. And don't write me telling me what the definition actually is of oxymoronical, or else, put your head in the adjoining noose and we'll plow along. Does that have anything to do with dumb farm animals? Well, I don't know. I guess we'll ask a dumb farmer. Listen one more time. Explanations are not intended to actually explain anything. And by that I mean, of course, to satisfy. The explain now I'm using twice in a sentence, but the final, or the second explanation, of course, is referring to some conclusive explanation. That is actually getting to a cause, to where there is no further question. You're saying, wait a minute, that almost explains it, except, what caused the one right behind that. That's what we mean now by the second explanation of the sentence. That explanations are not intended to actually explain anything, but their mere existence. That is, that people have explanations. So get right or wrong, we're talking about the world of facts. We're talking about the art of human speech and explanations. And none of it's right or wrong. Some of it is operationally correct at one time, and once something is functional at another time, and it keeps getting replaced and changed as needed in the city. But it's not a matter that one particular explanation is wrong. Explanations are not intended to explain anything. Their existence is in fact evidence that things cannot ordinarily be explained, or else you wouldn't have explanations. I tried to shorten it up again. Bring in another drummer. Do you see? Factually, it's of course insane and silly. But if things, in some way, if we could have our cake and eat it too, which I don't know why not. If things could actually be explained, you would not need the need for explanations. Certainly not in the plural sense. Do you understand? There would be an explanation. At one time, somebody would have pointed out the cause. That's it. But has that happened? Well, not since we've been here tonight. Unless some of us have really been slow walking. Has it happened over the last 15 billion years that we know of? The proof, all right, evidence, that explanations are not intended to explain anything, and in fact bear witness to the fact, admit the fact that things cannot be explained. The mere existence is that. Because they could be explained, you wouldn't need explanations. It's good to spend a little extra time. So to actually make things just as clear as you can. I know some of you will go home and now sleep like a safe cracker with a manicure. Expand it just a little bit more, a little more specifically. Consider. Some of you need to cheer up, I guess. Back to our use tonight of the concept, well, screw the concept, the word art. If you had this kind of reignited, revolutionary view of art, it would be absolutely impossible to ever be upset in any way, concerned at all with anyone else's art, whether it be scientific art, artistic art, religious art, entertaining art, which about covers it. It would be impossible to be upset. I take it from the crudest, which it churns up energy in life, at least any of you just sneer at it, but take it from the crudest, of somebody just having a fit over a painting. The king of a country just raising hell, or just an individual that you're just wandering through an art gallery somewhere and somebody suddenly is having an apothecary. Is that what you call it? Someone is having a fit. Someone who almost got into medical school. But somebody is standing there and just railing about, they call that art, and they're just having a fit. And they could even have some literary background and be trying to compare it to a Rembrandt. And so you can't call it. All the way from that to someone saying, I do not believe. I don't think there is valid statistical evidence to actually support, regardless of what is the common wisdom now, to actually support the general theory of relativity. Now you might think, well, that's getting into such areas they can debate those kind of small things. But they are still debating, they are debating art, and someone is upset. And somewhere in the middle is why I threw in all the way from scientific to religious. That you have people upset over other people's art. Their concept of a God, their concept of what is right and what is wrong. Where I was going to try to drag your attention about not being specifically upset of now using the term art rather than just saying that there would be no need to be sarcastic, cynical, smug about other people's explanations, is the whole art of their life, of some other person, some other group. That is, their apparent view of life, their apparent personal interpretation, their kind of explanations taken in toto, that the art of them being alive, of not being upset at anybody else. Remembering that art is a form of interpretation. It is not a cause, it is not an act, it is a comment thereon. On that basis, you would have to look at art, relatively speaking again, as being invented, artificial. That is, men made it up. That a painting like that, a piece of sculpture, does not happen accidentally. Just does not. A cathedral is not built accidentally. So anything that's artistic, and we're not using now artificial in a pejorative sense, but to compare it in a second with something else, that all such art, all the way from the construction in the world of architecture to a painting, to a religious idea, to a system of philosophy, you can look at all that as being artificial. That is, that men made it up. No doubt about it. And once you see that, then I'd have to ask you this. Who but a fool would make fun of something that somebody made up? If you had been alive, for instance, the last big reoccurrence that made the headlines, I guess back in the 20s, early teens of this century, spiritualism was very big in this country and in Europe. Some people even questioned the sanity of that great philosopher Arthur Conan Doyle because he believed that he could photograph fairies, which was really weird since he didn't even have a camera. But anyway, it was very big on people talking to the dead and spiritualism. But then also as big, Harry Houdini, I assume all of you have heard, besides being a stage magician, garnered a fairly serious reputation as being a debunker, a serious man who came out and said, oh no, I know what trickery is because I can do card tricks, I can get out of handcuffs, but we have now people fooling decent folk in the world by saying they talk to the dead. Now it was just life going on, but think about. Now let's assume that the people who believe they were talking to the dead and showing photographs of spirits they found, let's assume that it wouldn't hold up in a court of law. Now you could say, well, boy, that was kind of dumb. What's dumber? It's for a man to come along to debunk, to critique. But to debunk, I guess we'll do it. What would be dumber than a wandering dunderhead to come along and attempt to do a satire of an already established parody? This is clear enough. I hate to, well, sometimes we need to use you people out there, and the audience should know it has nothing to do with the specifics in mind. But I was going to say, if you look back historically, somebody thought, well, boy, the Catholic Church was in a terrible shape back in the 1400s. That's one thing, but then think about somebody, a Luther, don't take it personally. To criticize, like what we've got to do is take this sham outfit here and straighten it up. Think about it. And don't get hung on religion. I know it's necessary out in the ordinary world, but take it down to, if you need it another way, an absolute, tangible, a critic going out criticizing a play that another human sat down and made up. Or a critic criticizing a work of fiction or a work of nonfiction. They keep saying they can tell the difference. Notice this. People say they can tell the difference, but the publishers still put right on the book, right on the cover, novel. Just in case. Who but a fool is going to criticize something that people made up? Who but a fool is going to sit around if a kid keeps talking about his imaginary playmate, a little 5-year-old kid, and let's say that you're 40 years old and down there finished high school. Nobody's fool. And the kid keeps on talking about your imaginary playmate, and you begin to question him about, well, what kind of guy is he? And then begin perhaps to caution him, so well, you ought to get a better imaginary playmate. He's not our sort. What religion did you say he was? Or... Now, you might at first, I want you to see, because all these may seem to be silly examples, and those of you tuning in on the sarcastic frequency may think we're making fun, but we're not. I'm just trying to get you to see examples. You're surrounded, but you're not supposed to see it in a certain way because it's irrelevant to the ordinary functioning of the intellect. But to see that things from one view that you can look at that does not take any cynicism, that you can say, well, that's ridiculous. Do we all know that 5-year-old kids can make up imaginary playmates? And if I said, would you believe it? I mean, it's your kid. And you hope the best for him. You're already putting away money so he can go to podiatry school someday. Do you think anything's wrong? Well, no, it's just a made-up playmate. And so, would you go, oh, that's terrible. What an idiot. If you found a grown person taking something that was made up, just by any ordinary definition, just a childish illusion, and found another human, much less. What if he banded together with other humans and started a support group, which is one step from there to support wholes and then an institution? For them to sit around and they begin to criticize. They take an imaginary car wreck and they wring their hands over it. You do not hear, not me, you do not hear the history of man rolling behind us. You thought that was Gene Autry and a posse. That's history rolling by. The critique of the imaginary from one view. Because anything that is art, anything that is singularly human, in one sense, you've got to see it, is invented, is made up. Which is all right. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. But it is a satire of some kind. It is a comment on acts. That's all it can be. Who but an idiot? That is an ordinary person. We're not speaking about the idiots out there. I assume you're only interested in one idiot. No, not me. Everybody. Who would go to a play, go to all the trouble, and make sure that they point out the critic from the other paper in town, and you sit there and you don't watch the play. You watch him, and the next day you write a critique of his poor posture, the way he sat. He smacked his lips. You saw some dirt around his collar, as a matter of fact. And he left 10 minutes before the curtain went down. You don't see that? That's history. That's life. That is the continual reoccurrence of facts, reflections, explanations, not causes. It's not even noticed. When I said they were invented and made up, you can look back at the comparison if you can got a glimpse of it between acts and facts, and say that only acts, in a relative sense, got nothing to do with some social comment, but you could say in one sense that only acts would be natural. An earthquake. And by natural, an earthquake does not require the participation the comment, even the presence of a human. You'll grant us that, won't you? Tidal waves, the weather. They simply do not require that. What covers it. The participation, it doesn't need your help. An earthquake does not go and need people to come help it. It does not require your comment like, boy, that's a pretty small time earthquake. I don't know. That's not going to do it all. An earthquake go, wait a minute, I'll show you. It does not even require your presence. It requires no one's presence. An earthquake can do its job. But would you like to be blinded again by the unnoticed obvious? When you go into the world of facts, not the world of acts, the world of facts cannot exist without man. There is the difference. There is what, I wasn't going to stop on it, but I wanted you to see that all fact-based activities, what we're calling the world of facts as opposed to the world of acts, simply cannot exist without man. So to say that it's made up and invented is in no way a slam on facts. It is simply anytime you think about a fact, anytime you think about any form of art, anything that is singularly human, or conversely, think of anything that can go on that does not require a human's participation, his comment, nor even his presence, then you are dangerously close to an act. But anything that's not an act is going to be art. It's going to be facts. It's going to be a reflection and a comment on acts. That has, may I suggest to you, a very important functional significance in man's life. What we're talking about, just for 1 second, there's another, may I submit, fascinating facet to explanations, and that is that they are not literally, as it may sound even in a polarized world, that they are not literally terminal cul-de-sacs. They are more like circus cul-de-sacs. You know, you go down there and it's a turnaround. Because with explanations, as limited as they may seem from some descriptions if you were just listening with 2 ears, explanations are flexible enough. Explanations are not actually terminal cul-de-sacs. They are a dead end, but just like a circus, you know what, a circus, that kind of cul-de-sac, at least you can circle about and get out. It was a dead end, but there is the world of explanations. Took to the level of our great highway systems and the transportation departments. And can you believe that there's still people around? Can you believe it? People who will complain about the unreliability of human explanations. Can you believe that? There are people who complain. There are people that complain, well, wait a minute, by the time they tell us that one thing is true in the universe, then the scientists tell us something else. By the time they tell us that too much cholesterol, and God help us, 2 weeks later they say, more cholesterol. Or the church says, hey, on Friday, don't eat a taco. And then they say, hey! And people complain about it. They don't understand. I mean, it's life like hollering, hey, we're here, we're alive. It's life saying it's not terminal. And yet it lets a few soreheads continue to rail out against, wait a minute, I can't stand it anymore. Human explanations all the way from the scientific to the religious to the social. You can't depend on anything. I wish I'd have died some years back. Rather than be faced with this changing, I can't stand the way that my religion is changing, my neighborhood is changing, my nation is changing. Explanations are changing because they're alive. That's why they're explanations. Yes, but I thought that I'd finally gotten to where I understood something. Of course, people who say that, all they're doing is acknowledging, you remember that nice little Kyroot that a city's guy's best ally may be aging hormones. So when somebody says, well, about the time I'd about come to grips with that new morality they were talking about back in the 60s. Here I am now, myself I'm 60, and about the time I was getting used to that, now they start something else. They're not actually railing against ideas, they're railing against age. They are, in fact, crying out, how come these cul-de-sacs, why don't they do away with these turnarounds so they can finally get down a one-way street and stay there? Not all of them have the energy anymore to speak that dramatically and that loud. That's why I went ahead and did it for them at no additional charge. To even begin to approach the matter of causes, we're talking about explanations, but to even try to approach it, you have got to be fully operational. You've got to be practicing that great time-honored method, you recall, that we came up with shortly. You got to be thinking more than you have to even consider the possibility, to even try and come to some area that might be closer to causes than explanations. For causes, you have got to go somewhere beyond any kind of local, provincial, self-centered area of experience. Of feeling like, well, whatever it is I'm thinking about, whatever's happened to me, as we were talking about last time, it just suddenly happened. That it's all local. It is always, in a quite broad sense, everyone's understanding, everyone's insight is anecdotal. Everybody. We've been through this. You take a man who is PhD in psychology, philosophy, anything, and you get him and you start asking him his opinion on something, and what'll he do? All you got to do is just ask him one little question too many, or ask him a question, just push it that far, and what's he going to do? I mean, you start off and he's talking about, well, this professor so-and-so, or it's my last book, or all you got to do is push it. That is, trying to make him think a little more than he has to. And what does everybody do? The Pope, rabbis, your mother, the kings. They say, well, that reminds me of something that happened to me last week. They're going to tell you what kind of guy they are. That's all you can do. It's like, well, if there's anything important, it's based upon what's happened to me. I mean, if there's any truth, it's locally. Well, you got to feel that. If there's anything to be known, I know it. So, well, I'm glad you asked that. That reminds me, back in 1957 when I was in, and you know, well, here we go. It might as well be a sitcom. It's passing for science, it's passing for art as it should, but you're not going to get to a cause. I mean, the person doesn't know any more than you do, which of course you should have known that if you're dumb enough to ask somebody, but that's another story. It's in chapter 7 of the book, if you would kindly send. Call our 9,000 number. For causes, you have got to go beyond all of that. You've got to think more than you have to, because if you are conversely thinking just as much as you should, here's what you've got. Thinking just as much as you should produces explanations. Think about it. You don't want to think about it? Nobody wants to think about it. Well, see, some of you, if you keep thinking it's the old thing, you think, for instance, that car wrecks produce dead people on the highway. But, now some of you in a weak moment, you know damn well, I almost got you convinced that you could see that dead people on the highway cause car wrecks. If you're not thinking more than you have to, you cannot begin to get close. You can't even approach the question of causes. Withal, if you're only thinking as much as you should, whatever that is to you, if you're only thinking as much as you should, it produces explanations. Now, some of those dumb people that lived back in the latter part of the so-called Dark Ages that gave up the idea of spontaneous generation, as you recall, a bad step for humanity. For years, people properly believed that rags thrown in the corner and left there produced rats, that rats spontaneously generated from garbage. We all knew that was true, and then, I don't know, these people calling themselves Renaissance, I don't know, scientists said it's not true. But it's got to be true, is it not? See, the rags, thinking as much as you should, dealing in local intelligence, depending upon your own anecdotal laden life, it produces rats. You don't have to look anywhere. You don't say, where'd all these rats come from? You're the father of the rats. Thinking as much as you should, no matter what it is, no matter what your education, no matter what your brain size, no matter what your shoe size, no matter how you think, if you're only thinking as much as you should, that produces explanations. So don't say, wait a minute. Let me see, can you explain to me how I can get free of explanations and get closer to causes? Not in your case, sir. No, sure can't. Wait a minute. Is that because you don't like the cut of my jib? Is that because I didn't buy your damn book? No, it's because you no longer believe in spontaneous generation, because thinking as much as you should produces explanations. And then to say, well, how can I get rid of this? Give us a break. I like those scientific wrap-ups. Give me a break. All right. If facts were not flexible, there was another Kyroot that we'll try to hit for a minute from a few days ago. If facts were not flexible, acts would be intolerable. You can put that down and tell those Renaissance men, take a walk. Tell them to give your life a break. An ordinary, civilized, an ordinarily thinking, reasonable person, just an ordinary person at any time in history, thinking just as much as they should. Sane. Living example of reasonable life and thinking. Such people would find the direct, abrupt existence of a mere act-based world, if that were possible. They would find it to be far too brutish. It would just be unacceptable. If they did not have access to flexible, interchangeable, fashionable, seasonable art. That is, flexible facts and explanations. I bet some of you wondered why I went to all the trouble 4 or 5 minutes ago to point out that some people, in that dramatically satirical, if not downright sarcastic way of saying, can you believe there are people who still complain about, boy, you can't depend on any kind of human information? If the facts available to anybody, remember we're using facts, you can't get out. You can't say, well, wait, my cousin Herman's facts don't fit. Everybody's facts are facts. There are no such things as right or wrong facts in the way in which we're using them. There's no such thing as good or bad art. Things are either an act or they are a comment, a reflection, an explanation thereof. And on that basis, there are no such things as wrong explanations. Now, I know on a wide level, at any particular time, there seems to be. And out there are facts that are taken as being true, that is operational, they're serving a purpose, and there are those that are no longer operational, such as them believing that rags do not spontaneously generate rats, which is why they have a shortage of rats in some areas. They won't listen. But at any rate, were it not the fact that facts are flexible, in spite of my little dramatic thing of saying, can you believe that there are people who are still upset that when is humanity going to grow up and actually get down to intellectual business, because you can't depend on anything. Even medicine, the Surgeon General says, boy, everybody should have such and such kind of diet, and then 6 months later he says, well, now new statistics show that we should add more of this to our diet. The very thing they're saying, give me a break. It's the flexibility of facts that make the act-based world tolerable. Because if we played with justice again and suddenly took ordinary people, civilized, educated, sophisticated people, and could arbitrarily, right quick, strip away their factual-based outlook, their explanations, their art of being themselves, and they were suddenly still themselves in a sense, and they were confronted with a life that was strictly stripped down to an act-based life, to call it brutish is probably to be genteel about it. How could you deal with it? How could you deal with death? How could you deal with illness? How could you deal with all the things that everybody says is bad news? Or as the people in the Kyroots, those younger creatures today, and when the Kyroots, remember, they were upset just about being alive. And that guy at least had the decency to point out to him, hey, look. Of course, that was on their level. He said, hey, being alive is trouble enough. And the rest of this stuff that you guys are out here trying to storm the God head office and all those picket signs and what you're trying to do, That's your imagination. That is, that's your facts. That's your explanations. He said, hey, being alive is trouble enough. What he was referring to was if you could live both lives and step back and forth and see it simultaneously. Or if right now you had three eyes, if you could see outside three dimensions and polarize intellectual energy, you would see that what you think of as being problems, if you saw them directly, would be too brutish. You would be looking at an absolutely feral, unspeakable, uncivilized, blah, 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 blah life to a civilized person. But, thank be to the heavens, you have a factual world. And thanks also, the facts are flexible. And it makes, if not life downright enjoyable, it makes it tolerable. It keeps the students that now and again the dean guide can go, you guys go back to class. Or else maybe he just sends down an earthquake and wipes out half of them. At any rate, he knows how to handle it, and they all go back. And then everybody complains again. But you remember another Kyroot from a few nights ago. A father was telling his kid that one time, you could look at it this way, that one time everything was real. And that wasn't enough. So everybody started pretending. And they got so good at pretending that, in a sense, it became real and everybody forgot they were pretending. Comma. And then, and the old man said, I believe you can take it from there. It is that all explanations, in a sense, in a quite real sense, not because of some folly on man's intellectual part, but because of the limitations of three-dimensional universe being run by polarized octane and energy, that every explanation is a dead end. It does not give a cause. But it is not a terminal dead end. It is flexible. That is what the turnaround's for at the dead end of the cul-de-sac. You go down there, and sure, it's a dead end, but hell, you can get out. I can't live without that woman. Well, I'm sorry, she's gone, there's no doubt. I mean, I saw her in the car. She was with that sheetrock man, and they are bad. They're yesterday's news. I can't live with her. Are you sure she's gone? Yeah. What about that girl that lived down the street? Is she still... a certain amount of flexibility. Oh. Well, we can't have any flexibility with the old clock on the wall. It's a sore head. That's absolutely it, right? 1 minute. A 1 minute wrap up. Can we get 1 minute?
Yes.
Can I have a minute? Take me to the minute. All right, how about this? Beyond the fact that all of these flexible explanations, and that from one view, never get anywhere, they're not solid, you can't depend on them, they're simply not causes. It's not part of the normal workings of the human intellect. Beyond all of that, and beyond the fact that you've got to recognize that what some people attack as being the instability, the undependability of facts and art, that it's all too subjective, it's all too shifty, that is the life of it, that is the remedial beauty of it, that if it does not make life enjoyable to most people, it renders it tolerable. Beyond all of that, corrupt. That's a French kind of pastry that the common folk eat. Beyond all of the crapé, beyond all of that. Well, at least I didn't say shit. I mean crap. Beyond all of that, I wanted to point out would be the revolutionist motto that you heard from Kyroot, but he stole it from somebody else. Facts. The ultimate human entertainment.